We'll move to question time. Senator Dean Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. In May last year, the Prime Minister Albanese committed a Labor government to having real, lasting plans for cheaper mortgages. Given Australian families have now faced 11 interest rate rises since the election of a Labor government, can the Minister report progress on the government's real and lasting plan for cheaper mortgages?
Thank you, Senator Dean Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Yes, I can. Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the question and the opportunity to talk about Labor's housing agenda, which includes Thank you for the interjection, Senator Birmingham, but it's a part of a broader suite of policies that relate to Labor's housing agenda, of which the Housing Australia Future Fund is one of them. There we have one of our future policies, the Housing Australia Future Fund, $10 billion fund, blocked by those opposite who refuse to acknowledge that the Commonwealth has a role to play in housing policy. The Minister for Housing, this isn't my portfolio repping area, of course, but I take the question.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. Senator Smith.
Point of order on relevance. The question clearly talked about mortgages and clearly talked about 11 interest rate rises.
Thank you, Senator Smith. And I think by definition mortgages go to housing. The Minister is being relevant, but I'll listen carefully, and if she's not relevant, I'll draw her to your question. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We went to the election with a very significant policy in relation to housing. It had a number of different features. We had the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. We have, of course, the negotiations that we're having with the states and territories on National Housing and Homelessness Agreement. In the budget, we've included incentives to increase the build-to-rent accommodation. We've got additional $2 billion in financing for community housing providers. We've got the recent Social Housing Accelerator, another $2 billion. We've got the Commonwealth Rent Assistance increase, largest increase in 30 years. And we have other policy. Well, yeah, hang on. We haven't got through it all yet. The National Housing Accord, a shared ambition to build 1 million homes, $350 million.
Please resume your seat. Senator Dean Smith.
President, on direct relevance, it clearly talked about cheaper mortgages and 11 interest rate rises.
Thank you, Senator Smith. I'll draw the Minister to those points in your question. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much. So we've got the Housing Accord, we've got the Home Guarantee Scheme, and of course we've got the Help to Buy scheme, which is a program to support eligible Australians on low to moderate incomes to purchase their own home with a smaller deposit, which will result in smaller mortgage and smaller mortgage payments, and we're working with the states and territories on that.
Senator Dean Smith, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. The Statement of Monetary Policy released by the RBA on Friday revealed that, and I quote, scheduled mortgage payments have risen by around 2.25 percentage points of household disposable income since the March quarter of 2022 and will continue to increase as borrowers with expiring fixed-rate loans roll off onto higher rates. Minister, isn't this proof the Prime Minister has no real nor lasting plan to ease
Smith.
mortgage—
The time for asking your question has expired, Minister Gallagher.
Well, no, that is not true, Senator Smith. And if you listen to the last 2 minutes of your first answer, or first question, you will have heard all of the different policies that we are putting in place to deal with the housing crisis that we inherited from you when you were in government. It's another area. Well, no, you do need to take responsibility for the fact that the Commonwealth completely vacated the field, particularly in relation to public, social and affordable housing, and it was about just letting the market rip. And we are back in at the table working with the states and territories, and the program that the Prime Minister was referring to.
Senator Smith.
Madam President, we're not talking about Labor's housing crisis. We're talking about Labor's mortgage payments crisis.
The Minister is being relevant. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. And the program that Senator Smith refers to, which is the Help to Buy program, around ensuring that people who are currently unable to afford to get into the housing market as owners are given support through their governments, and we are working with the states and territories on the implementation of that program right now.
Senator Smith, second supplementary.
Thank you very much, President. The Statement of Monetary Policy released on Friday by the RBA also said, based on cash rate increases to date, scheduled payments are projected to increase to an historical high of around 9.8% of household disposable income by the end of the year. Minister, will the Prime Minister apologise to Australian families for failing on his commitment to deliver real, lasting plans for cheaper mortgages and instead inflicting on them the highest scheduled mortgage payments in
Thank you, Senator
history?
Smith. The time for asking has expired. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot in that to unpack, but the government is implementing all of the policies it took to the election, including the Help to Buy scheme, which we are working with states and territories on, and this is why our cost of living package that we have been brought in through the budget and otherwise has been so important to assist those households who we acknowledge are under pressure because of rising interest rates, because of high inflation and because of the impact of the global economy on some of our supply chains, which is feeding the inflation issue in the country. So we accept that that is the case. That is what's happening in the economy, and why, when we brought here $3 billion worth of energy bill relief support and you voted against it, we couldn't believe it. You actually voted against people receiving cost of living relief in an environment where they're doing it tough. This government will deliver on all the things that it said at the election, and we will do more, as we have been doing since we formed government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ciccone.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Wong. Minister, I heard on Friday your announcement, together with the Trade Minister, that the pathway negotiated with China to remove duties on Australian barley has led to a successful outcome. Given the government has also restarted constructive dialogue with China while maintaining our strategic settings and protecting our national security, can the Minister please advise on Australia's current approach to our relationship with China and the progress that's been made in stabilising the bilateral relationship?
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Senator Ciccone not only for his question but his deep interest in Australian foreign policy and Australia's place in the world. Well, we welcome the decision by the PRC to remove the 80.5% anti-dumping and countervailing duties on Australian barley. This is the right outcome for Australian producers and the right outcome for Chinese consumers, and it affirms the calm and consistent approach that the Albanese government has taken. The removal of these duties is the result of work by government and industry to resolve this matter, working through the World Trade Organisation. I acknowledge the work done by ministerial colleagues, particularly the Minister for Trade, Senator Farrell, and their officers. I acknowledge the work of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and a number of other government departments, including Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Since the Albanese government was elected, we have said we will take a calm and consistent approach to foreign policy. We will renew our relationships, we will engage in the region, and we will make sure we fully engage in the multilateral system. This includes seeking to stabilise the bilateral relationship with China. We have always said we believe this is in both countries' interests. We have also been clear that our national interests and strategic settings have not changed. In the past year, I've had the opportunity to have a number of constructive meetings with my Chinese counterparts. The Prime Minister has met with President Xi, and other ministers from our government continue to engage in a way that serves the interests of Australia and Australians. As we have said, when it comes to our relationship with China, we will cooperate where we can. We will disagree where we must, and we will engage in our national interest. And we will continue to speak out as necessary on the issues that matter to Australians, including human rights, consular cases and, of course, trade issues.
Senator Ciccone, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. A bit quiet on the other side, I've noticed.
Senator Ciccone, that is very unhelpful. I've called order.
But funny as well too.
Senator Ciccone, resume your seat. Order on my left. Order. Senator Cash. Order across the chamber. Senator Ciccone, please refrain from personal interjections about other matters other than your question.
And on that note, President, I want to thank the Minister on her answer and also provide an update on a very good outcome for Australia's agriculture, particularly our barley growers. Minister, how does the government work through the WTO to achieve good outcomes like this one for Australia?
Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Ciccone. Can I acknowledge and thank the industry and affected businesses for their support and their patience throughout this WTO process. Australia would not have been able to reach this outcome without first pursuing our dispute through the World Trade Organisation. It is a key element of the international rules and norms to which Australia is committed, ensuring that all members, regardless of economic weight or size, are able to hold other countries to account when rules have not been respected. So while the WTO encourages bilateral resolution to disputes, its mandate is what draws countries to the bilateral negotiating table. President, we know that countries want a prosperous and connected region, trading with transparency and predictability, where economic interdependence is not misused for political and strategic ends. The Australian government, the Albanese government, will continue to work within that system to stand up for the rights of Australian exporters and seeking to resolve differences over trade matters.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Ciccone, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Can the Minister also advise how Australia's approach to the international system and to relations with countries in our region is restoring Australia's reputation in the world?
Minister Wong.
The Albanese government has renewed Australia's closest relationships and also our commitment to the multilateral system. What we have left behind, what we have left in the past, is the approach from Mr Morrison and Mr Dutton of picking international fights to create a domestic headline. What we've left in the past is the attacks on international institutions that actually enhance our sovereignty. Remember, negative globalism from the other side. We are working with our partners and with international institutions to advance Australia's interests. Not only is that achieving progress, as we've seen with barley, but it also changes the way the countries of the region look to us. It enhances Australia's reputation as a responsible and reliable partner. It makes us stronger and more influential in the world. As our region and our world become more complex and challenging, we are deploying all elements of our national power to shape a region in our interests, one that is open, stable and prosperous, and in which sovereignty is respected.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash.
Thank you, President. And my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, in August 2021, in a joint release with Minister Burney, the Prime Minister said, "Labor will deliver on a national process for treaty-making and truth-telling." Yesterday on Insiders, the Prime Minister said this: "Well, treaty is occurring. There's 400 Indigenous nations in this country, so we're not talking about centralised operations here." Minister, does the Albanese government support the Commonwealth engaging in treaty-making with Indigenous people at a national level?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Before I call the Minister, I'm going to remind senators that the minister's answer needs to be heard in silence. Minister Wong.
Well, the first point I would make is a reminder about what the word Makarrata means. It comes from the Yolngu people in Arnhem Land, as Senator McCarthy.
Order. 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 Minister, please continue. It includes
meaning coming together after a struggle. It is about bringing people together, and it is disappointing to see Senator Cash again, notwithstanding her leadership position, leading the charge to divide the country. What I would also say about treaty is I'd make the point that the Prime Minister made. He said this: "We are not talking about centralised operations here. A treaty is occurring. There's 400 Indigenous nations in this country, so we're not talking about centralised operations here." So I think that is a response to Senator Cash's point. But I would also make this point, which I made last week, but no doubt Senator Cash didn't want to hear it. Treaty is being progressed with bipartisan support in Queensland. Treaty is being progressed in Victoria with bipartisan support. It is being progressed in the Northern Territory, and in fact it is in Tasmania where a Liberal government has established a pathway to truth-telling and treaty. These are all good things. These are all good things. I think it is disappointing that those on the other side continue, in the face of so much to gain from this process, they seek to ensure that they talk about everything but a voice to the parliament. It is disappointing, and I wish that some more senior people had joined the Prime Minister at Garma and perhaps had the opportunity to actually engage with leaders of First Nations on this issue to understand why this invitation has been made and why it matters to our country.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. In his 2019 address to the Garma Festival, the Prime Minister called Makarrata the path to treaty. But in his address to the Garma Festival this weekend, the Prime Minister didn't use the words treaty or Makarrata at all. Again, does the Albanese government support the Commonwealth engaging in treaty making with Indigenous people at a national level?
Minister Wong.
Well, it was a good thing the Prime Minister was there. It's disappointing that we didn't see the leadership of the coalition there to listen to not only the Prime Minister but to First Nations leaders who were there about why this matters to the country. I've responded. Essentially, Senator Cash is continuing to ask the same question she asked. No, actually, I do answer them, Senator Cash. I do answer them. You just don't like the answer. You don't like the answer because you are opposed to the voice. You are opposed to a voice.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. I remind Minister Wong to direct her answers to the chair, and I will once again reiterate to senators that I expect silence when answers are being given. Minister Wong.
The reality is Senator Cash and those opposite want to talk about everything but voice. Yep. They want to talk about everything but voice because actually the invitation by First Nations peoples to have a voice to the parliament, so in order to listen, to have better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians is not a great ask. So they don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about something else.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Minister, in February 2021, the Prime Minister told the Parliament a Makarrata Commission, as outlined in the Uluru Statement, would oversee a national process of truth-telling agreement and treaty making. But in answer to a direct question in the Parliament last week, the Prime Minister refused to use the word treaty at all. Again, does the Albanese government support the Commonwealth engaging in treaty making with Indigenous people at a national level?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I've referred to my answer, which I've now given at least on 2 or 3 occasions on that point. Can I just give you this? I'm also deeply committed to delivering a pathway to treaty and truth-telling in deep consultation through an Aboriginal-led process. Jeremy Rockcliffe, Tasmanian Premier, 8th of April 2022. Mr Mundine, I've always supported treaties between—
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, I've called you to order a number of times throughout the primary and the first supplementary and the second supplementary. I'm asking you to do as I've requested and listen in silence. Minister Wong. Please continue.
Thank you, President. I've always supported treaties between governments and Indigenous First Nations. I propose that the government offer each First Nation a treaty recognising them as traditional owners of their land and sea, concluding any native title claims over those areas. Warren Mundine, May 2017. The Liberals and Nationals are committed to advancing the treaty process in Victoria in a way that supports self-determination and reconciliation while strengthening community and connection with country. We will continue working closely with traditional owners to ensure this process drives genuine progress. Peter Walsh, Victorian Nationals, this really demonstrates what you are all about. You are not interested in substance and outcome. You're interested in a political scare campaign.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Order. Order. Senator Sterle. Oh, beg your pardon, sorry. Senator Barbara Pocock, my apologies.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Four Corners revealed allegations that KPMG has been ripping off the Australian public by submitting inflated invoices and billing the government for hours never worked. Since 2012, 1 in 5 government contracts have been varied, never down, always up, by an average of 139%. This massive land and expand tactic is straight out of the consultancy profit playbook. Will the government stop the rampant use of land and expand by consultants?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Pocock for the question, and I acknowledge the work that the Senate is doing in this regard under the leadership of Senator O'Neill and Senator Pocock in pursuing issues that we've seen this year come to light, led by the PwC Tax Practitioners Board case, and then some of the work that we've been continuing on from that. I would say that in a general sense there is a heap of work before us around how we rebalance the public service away from its over-reliance and dependence and inter-reliance on contractors, consulting companies. I knew it was a problem from opposition. It's worse than I thought when I came into this role and started having a look at it. And we have started the work, as you know, by trying to rebalance that by reducing the budget for a start and re-employing public servants into roles that we believe should be done by the public service on behalf of the people of Australia, not by private consulting companies. There is more work to be done. I think the area of contract extension or escalation is a real problem. It's one that I'd noticed in opposition. There are rules around it that have to be met when contracts are varied, and those processes are outlined under guidance under the procurement rules. But I do believe that there is more that we can do in this area to make sure that we are getting value for money, that we're managing those interests between taxpayers' funds and the way we procure services external to government are met. And I think, certainly from my point of view, there's a stack of work underway, but we're really only at the beginning of this.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplement.
Thank you, Minister. It looks like those rules are certainly working very well for the Big Four and their bottom line. Four Corners also reveals 2 senior public servants at the ATO, with the ATO's knowledge, continue to receive payments arising from their previous employment in a big consultancy. Are these the only 2? And what steps will you take to end conflicts of interest like these?
Thank you, Senator Pocock.
Thank you. Well, I would have to come back on anything further I can in relation to the specific question that Senator Pocock asks. I'm not aware of any more, but I will come back. And in relation to the last part of your question, conflict of interest, that is a piece of work which is assessing it and examining it is underway about how we best manage conflict of interest issues across the public service in relation to external labour. I think there was a number of issues that were raised at estimates that raised flags with me about arrangements that were in place with some of these companies and other clients they might have, but there are also issues that we have to look at across the APS. This is something that Finance and I will be working on, but as Senator Pocock will see, we had a comprehensive response to many of those issues outlined yesterday, but there is more work to be done.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Pocock's second supplementary.
Thank you, President. PwC has announced that they will no longer make donations to political parties to ensure, and to quote them, the highest standard of governance. Will the government follow PwC's lead and support the Greens bill to ban firms contracting with government from donating to political parties?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister.
Thank you. Well, in relation to that question, the position on the private senators bill, I think it is, we will go through our own processes in formulating our position on that bill. But I would say, again, this is something the Greens usually do in their third question, is raise the issue of political donations as a way of besmirching, I think, the government without any evidence or anything to back it up. And I would say our political donations are disclosed in accordance with the law. It has nothing to do with procurement across government. The idea that ministers are involved in procurement or doing something, well, if you have something to say that proves that, then come forward with it. But you haven't been able to show anywhere where those two things are linked. It's simply incorrect. And if you did have anything, you should send it to the NAC.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sterle. Thank
you, President. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. Now, late last week, the Australian government announced that China would remove the 80.5% anti-dumping and countervailing duties on Australian barley. It has been reported that the Chinese duties on Australian barley effectively blocked exports to that market worth nearly $1 billion prior to the duties being imposed. This outcome has been welcomed by Australian grain producers, exporters. It's welcomed by me, as every other West Australian, as China has historically been a very important export market for malting barley over many decades. Now, Minister, can you outline what action the Albanese government has taken to pave the way for the re-entry of Australian barley to the Chinese market?
Thank you, Senator Sterle. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And can I thank Senator Sterle for his question? I know he is a great friend of farmers, particularly Western Australian farmers. And I was very pleased to announce last Friday that as of the 5th of August, Australian traders will no longer face an 80.5% import duty when exporting barley to China. This follows an expedited review by China's Ministry of Commerce of its trade measures imposed in May 2020 on Australian barley imports. China initiated a fast-track review following an April agreement reached between Australia and China to suspend the WTO dispute on barley. The expedited review was the result of the re-establishment of dialogue between the Australian and Chinese governments following a long period of diplomatic silence under the former coalition government. From the start, I've said that we would prefer to sort out these matters by engaging in sensible dialogue and negotiation rather than through the courts. Consistent with the terms of the April agreement reached with China, Australia will now discontinue our World Trade Organisation dispute. If we had to continue to pursue this matter through the WTO dispute mechanism, we would not have had a resolution for at least another 12 months. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Australian grains industry, the government officials, for all the hard work to get this result, and in particular Senator Wong for her wonderful efforts in this regard, particularly just before Christmas last year. This outcome demonstrates the importance of the WTO dispute mechanism in defending the interests of Australia's world-class producers and farmers, and without such a mechanism we would never have gotten China to the negotiating table.
Thank you, Minister Farrell. Senator Sterle, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. And my gosh, this really is exciting. Minister, the removal of Chinese import duties on Australian barley is a positive development, but trade impediments imposed by China are affecting the export of other Australian grape products, including wine and crayfish. What is the Albanese government doing to remove these trade impediments?
Thank you, Senator Sterle. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. I can answer that question, Senator Sterle, because while there's been positive progress on trade impediments, there's still some way to go until we see normal trade resume across the board with China. With the removal of the barley duties, the value of trade impacted has been reduced to just over $2 billion. The Albanese government is working hard to remove those remaining trade impediments. This year I've met with my Chinese counterpart, Commerce Minister Wang Wentao, on 3 occasions. In my meetings with Minister Wang, I've consistently advocated strongly for the full resumption of unimpeded Australian exports to China. I intend to continue discussions with Minister Wang to resolve those outstanding issues. So far, dialogue rather than bluster has proven effective.
How about that?
Senator Sterle, second supplementary.
Yes, thanks, President. And Minister, there have been several positive trade developments this year with China, including the resumption of Australian exports of coal, cotton, copper ores and concentrates, and the lifting of quarantine restrictions on timber logs. While these developments are welcome, Can the government detail what work is being undertaken to support market diversification for all exporters? Thanks, Minister.
Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Sterle for his second supplementary question. And yes, I can talk about those things because a priority of the Albanese government has been to work to stabilise our relationship with China, by far our largest trading partner. Notwithstanding steps taken towards a stable relationship with China, prudent businesses will continue to diversify their markets. Recent experience demonstrates that over-reliance on any single trading partner comes with its risks. The Albanese government has been encouraging Australian businesses to continue with their diversification plans and take advantage of new and emerging markets. A key element of the government's trade diversification agenda is entering into new and comprehensive free trade agreements. The United Kingdom, the Indian markets now offer new opportunities for Australian producers and traders. And we're currently in tough negotiations to conclude the best trade deal possible with the European Union.
Minister Farrell, the time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. Minister, the COVID batch release assessment for each COVID vaccine batch is produced after testing each batch. Who performed the test?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I just missed the beginning of that question. Sorry, Senator Roberts. Could you ask it again?
Senator Roberts.
The COVID batch release assessment for each COVID vaccine batch is produced after testing each batch. Who performed the test?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Well, this would have been work led by the TGA, but I will seek if I can find further information about whether or not they were assisted by other laboratories. I imagine they were as part of that work, but I will check and see if there's anything further I can provide to Senator Roberts.
Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, if an Australian laboratory acting on behalf of the Australian government has not tested the COVID vaccines, we could be buying adulterated product, mislabelled product or saline. How do the people and how does the Senate know what's in the vaccines?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, it's because it will go through the TGA's established processes, that's why, and there would be significant checking of those arrangements with laboratories doing that work. I mean, this isn't something that would be just left to, a laboratory saying I've done it and ticked it off. The quality and safety measures that would be put in place by the TGA in getting those approvals are thorough, and as we have seen through the rollout of the vaccine is safe and effective, and we've seen that over the last 3 years after it was rolled out, and millions of vaccines have been provided through the vaccine rollout program, including the fact that we are now seeing significantly less severe disease or loss of life from.
Has expired. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Minister, how many other vaccines or Schedule 4 drugs are being imported into Australia in a situation where the safety testing was on the honour system, allowing the drug company or manufacturer to provide their own safety testing?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister.
Well, for a start, I don't accept that it was done on an honour system. I do accept that in relation to the COVID vaccine approval process, it was a shortened process because of the urgency and the crisis that, well, the world was in as the pandemic rolled through. It did require, the vaccine actually being created and then...
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, President. My question was to other vaccines or Schedule 4 drugs, not the COVID vaccines.
Yes, I think the Minister went to that, but I'll remind her of that part of your question.
Yes, so I guess the point I'm making, Senator Roberts, is that it was a highly unusual situation to be in. I think everyone's acknowledged that the process around the approvals for the COVID vaccine were different and had been shortened when compared to the approvals for other drugs. But that is reflective of the fact we were in a global pandemic and thousands of people, or millions of people, were dying from the effects of COVID, and we needed a vaccine in place to protect the community, and that's actually what happened through the TGA's approval processes.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Wong. The Western Australian Labor government has admitted its Aboriginal cultural heritage laws are disastrous, and they have been forced to abandon them in a most humiliating backdown after less than 1 month. Does the Albanese government welcome this backflip by the West Australian government? And given the total confusion, will the Albanese government commit to the Australian people that no aspect of these now abandoned laws will be replicated at a federal level?
Thank you. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Reynolds for her question, and I make the point to her that I think I made to her colleague Senator Cash and others, that obviously this is the federal parliament, not the West Australian parliament. I appreciate the opposition have a lot of—
Order. Order. Minister Wong, please continue.
Obviously, the political commentary in her question, which she is entitled to make in speeches and so forth, are not actually relevant to a question to a Commonwealth Minister. What I would say—
Order. Senators, I've called for order and I've required you to listen to the question in silence. Minister Wong, please continue.
Thank you. The comments that Senator Reynolds made about the Western Australian government, I suggest to her, can be addressed to the Western Australian government, and it's a matter for them to respond to that political commentary. In relation to the question about the Commonwealth, Minister Plibersek has made it very clear last week that there will not be a Commonwealth takeover of laws, and that the Albanese government will not be adopting or duplicating existing state and territory regimes. So that is the response to the issues that the Senator has raised. I would make the point again. I understand time to time we all come in here playing a bit of state and territory politics in this chamber. I think everybody does that occasionally, but
Order.
Well, yes, it is the State's House, but ultimately, I'm trying not to respond to some of the interjections here, but ultimately those laws are matters for state parliaments. We're here to deal with federal parliament matters. I would also make the point— that I made previously, that in fact the cultural heritage laws were part of a discussion that Ms Lee initiated, so it was in fact initiated by those on the other side, but I understand that there is no scare campaign that they don't wish to adopt in relation to—
Thank you, Minister. Senator Reynolds, first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I'm sure all senators here really enjoyed that lesson on the Constitution. Somewhat probably unnecessary, but my second question is, did Mr Albanese or anyone in his office talk to or pressure the Western Australian Labor government to abandon these disastrous laws?
Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, I do note that, of course, that was the default under Mr Morrison and Mr Dutton, and that blaming the states, having a fight with the states, was a very, very common way in which they dealt with any political issues. I'm sure that would be the instinctive response from those who are members of the Morrison-Dutton cabinet. I have no knowledge of any such discussions being had. If I am able to update the chamber about these matters in any way, I obviously will do so, but I would again make the point that these are matters for the Western Australian state government, and this is a Western Australian state legislation. The opposition have spent some time playing a lot of politics with this issue in this chamber and in Western Australia. And I make the same point again, matters for the Western Australian Government, and Ms Lee herself commenced the discussion about cultural heritage. I have responded on that, Senator.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Reynolds, second supplementary.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I can assure everybody here in this chamber that those on this side know just how important this issue is to West Australians, which led to the backflip. So my question is that the National Farmers Federation was quoted last week as being paralysed with fear regarding these laws. You assured the Senate that I have no doubt that Minister Plibersek will ensure that all stakeholders are consulted. So how many times specifically has the minister consulted with the NFF, and what is your government planning to do through your cultural heritage laws?
Thank you, Senator Reynolds. I'm waiting for silence on my right before I call the minister. Minister Wong.
I would make the point that I think the senator is asking me a question about the consultation process which is still underway and which her deputy leader, not Senator Cash but Ms Lee, commenced. It was a process for discussion that was supported by calls from the member for Leichhardt. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition said this is about the government working with Indigenous Australians. In fact, Senator Duniam even talked about he said that the Juukan Gorge events were so disastrous they made it.
Your seat. I'm waiting for silence. Senator Reynolds, I haven't called you. I'm waiting for silence. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you, President. On point of order on direct relevance, the question was how many times specifically has the minister consulted with the NFF?
I believe the minister has been answering that, Senator Reynolds, and I'll continue to listen carefully. Minister Wong.
As I said, this process was begun under Ms Lee, and I was trying to quote Senator Duniam, but I can understand why people might want to interject. The Juukan Gorge events were so disastrous that they made it very clear that comprehensive work needed to begin as a matter of urgency on modernising Indigenous heritage protection laws.
Senator Wong.
So it is interesting now you come
Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Reynolds. Just a moment, Senator Reynolds. Sorry, I did call you, but I'll wait for silence. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, President. Again, a question on direct relevance. The question was how many times specifically has the minister, as in Minister Plibersek, consulted? And 4 seconds to go, and the minister has got nowhere near answering that.
Senator Reynolds, it doesn't need your commentary on it. You've called the point of order. I said I'd remind the minister of that part of your question, which I have done. Minister Wong.
I will get advice on how many times she has met with the NFF, Senator.
Senator Rice.
Thanks, President. Minister. Oh, sorry. My questions to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Senator Watt. Minister, the Labor Environment Action Network has released a paper that explicitly calls on Labor to end native forest logging. This call has been backed by over 300 Labor branches. To date, the Labor cabinet has ignored scientists, environmentalists and community members to side with the logging industry. Are you also planning to ignore your own party members to enable this continued environmental vandalism?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Rice, for the question. I'm always happy to take a question on agriculture, fisheries and forestry, and today we've had 2 such questions from the Labor Party, 1 from the Greens Party, but none from the National Party. The National Party's given up on agriculture, given up, and is it any wonder? Senator Rice, this is obviously an issue that you've asked me about on a number of occasions, and I will continue to make the same response, which is that the Albanese government supports Australia's sustainable forestry industry. It's good that you're showing a lot of interest in the internal workings of the Labor Party, and we will have our national conference next week, and we will just discuss a range of matters, including this one, and no doubt come to a resolution of that. As I say, the Albanese government's support for our sustainable forestry industry is very clear and has been backed up by over $300 million in investment in our forestry industry since coming to power. The measures that we've funded include modernising timber manufacturing and encouraging innovation, building workforce skills in the forestry industry, removing the water rule, something that the National Party imposed, the water rule which actually prevented the plantation of timber and created a disincentive for the plantation of timber. And of course we're also investing over $70 million in the plantation estate, again something that we didn't see under the former government. So the reality is that in order for Australia to meet its timber and wood product needs, we do need a mixture of plantation and native forestry, and that might be an inconvenient fact for the Greens Party, but it is a fact. And what we're doing is about making sure that as the proportion of native forestry does reduce, we are actively supporting the plantation industry in a way we've never seen before.
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister, before I call you Senator Rice, Senator McKim, I think it's you. It's a bit hard to tell with the mask on, but the constant interjections are disorderly. My apologies if it isn't you, but I'm fairly certain it is. Senator Rice, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. So the answer is yes, you are going to ignore your Labor Party members and branches. But, Minister, do you agree with the statement in the Lean paper that protecting remaining native forests and regenerating forest is essential to achieve Labor's commitment to action on climate change and would help to achieve Australia's 2030 emissions reduction target?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Watt.
Thank you again, Senator Rice. And again, I deeply welcome the Greens Party's interest in the internal machinations of the Labor Party. As you would be aware, yes, you can watch it on TV. Unlike a certain party that is named after a colour, the Labor Party has an open national conference. Anyone is welcome to come and watch. Anyone is welcome to turn it on TV and watch. It's something the Greens could actually learn from. I mean, we hear a lot from the Greens about transparency, about the need for accountability, but we've got a party named after a colour that prefers to have its little conferences in quiet corners in the dark. I'll let you work out what colour that might be. But as I say, the Labor Party and the Albanese government are very supportive of our forestry industry because of the timber and wood that it produces.
Senator Rice.
My point of order is with regard to relevance. Could you bring the minister's attention to the question, which was whether he agreed with the statement in the Lean paper that protecting native forests and regenerating forests is essential to meeting our climate target?
Thank you, Senator Rice. And you also went to the Labor Party again, and so the minister is entitled to answer that part of your question. But I will remind him of the second part of your question. Minister Watt.
Well, as I say, I welcome the contribution from any section of the community to put forward its views about forestry or any other issue, but of course it's the Albanese government that will be setting government policy, and our policy is to support a sustainable forestry industry backed up by the investments I've talked about.
Minister Watt, the time for answering has expired. Senator Rice, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. Minister, the Western Australian and Victorian Labor governments are ending native forest logging and are going to reap the benefits of protecting biodiversity, and it will help them meet their carbon reduction targets. Will you show leadership, scrap the regional forest agreements and encourage the New South Wales and Tasmanian governments to follow the lead of the West Australian and Victorian governments?
Thank you, Senator Rice. Minister Watt.
Thank you again, President, and thank you, Senator Rice. Well, in the three questions I've received from Senator Rice, we've had a discussion about Labor Party internal machinations and the activities of state governments. But I repeat my statement that the Albanese government supports a sustainable forestry industry that includes plantation developments, which are expanding on our watch as opposed to falling under the coalition government. But we do recognise that there is a need and a place for native forestry in terms of our timber mix, and I'm not sure where the Greens would propose that we would obtain some of those timber and wood products from if their position was to be adopted. But we are serious about supporting plantation development, and that's why we're investing over $70 million in new plantation development. It's why we're in the process of removing the water rule, something that was introduced by the National Party to the expense of the plantation industry.
Thank you, Minister Watt. The time for answering has expired. Senator Green.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Women and the Minister representing the Minister for Sport, Senator Gallagher. Over recent weeks, millions of people in Australia and across the world have tuned in and turned out to watch the Women's World Cup. Whether dressed in green and gold to support the Matildas or to watch amazing women from across the world compete on the global stage, the World Cup has captured the heart of the nation. At the same time, the Diamonds have successfully dealt with their unfinished business by claiming victory at the Netball World Cup in South Africa. Can the Minister update the Senate on the impact of these events on women in sport?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Green for the question, and I acknowledge her work and her contribution to support women in sport, and particularly in relation to the Women's World Cup as co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Football, and for the very many speeches you do in this place on the Matildas in particular. The Women's World Cup has once and for all ended any debate about the place of women's sport in this country. The Matildas' opening game reached almost 5 million people across Australia, shattering records. In Sydney, more than 75,000 fans packed in to set a new attendance record for women's football matches, and more than 40,000 fans watched England against Haiti in Brisbane. This tournament has been such a game changer for women and girls, and it's not just in football that women are leading the way. I'd give a huge congratulations to the Diamonds team and their coach for their victory against England in the Netball World Cup, a 61-45 defeat, and I have no doubt there's a lot of tired eyes in this place today, sitting up in the early hours of this morning to watch that amazing result. Our women athletes are excelling on the world stage and have changed sport in this country. The professional lives our Diamonds and Matildas are experiencing now has been born from the sacrifices of those before them. Only a decade ago, the Matildas had to train in car parks at night time with car headlights as their only source of light. In the late 80s, the first ever Matilda, Julie Dolan, organised off the books a high-stakes poker night to fundraise. This allowed the team to travel to China for an international tournament in 1988, a tournament that morphed into the Women's World Cup. Now the Matildas get bigger crowds than the men. The tournament has sold more than 1.5 million tickets, breaking records repeatedly. And some people are wondering whether this event will push the Matildas to be more popular than the men's team. Well, they already are on the statistics. Football Australia's own metrics show this, and all of their social engagement approves it.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Green for supplementary.
Thank you, President. Well, the Women's World Cup has shown how much the community is willing to celebrate and support women in sport. Can the Minister detail how the Albanese government is taking action to foster better environments for women in sport, not only to support our current teams, but to lay the groundwork for young women and girls who will form the teams of the future?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. The Australian government is determined to pursue gender equality across the board, and we've committed more than $84 million to support the bidding, delivery and legacy of the Women's World Cup here in Australia. With that funding, the Matildas have had 8 extra international matches leading up to the World Cup. They've also been able to hire a second assistant coach, a psychologist, a sports scientist, a team chef and a team doctor. The Matildas now have equal staffing to our men's teams, the Socceroos, as it should be. Our funding also supports the first technical director of female football, the first technical lead of the Future Matildas program, an assistant team manager for young Matildas, and the National Female Wellbeing Manager. As a result, almost 20 new players have now joined the Matildas program, and the Matildas are the first women's football team in the world to receive the same pay as their male counterparts. At the grassroots level, we're making football more inclusive and accessible to girls and marginalised communities, and we are committed to continue this in the pursuit of gender equality across sport.
Expired. Senator Green, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Well, it's been incredible to not just see the prominence of the Women's World Cup on a global scale, but to be hosting such a successful tournament and demonstrating how Australia values women in sport at a local level. Of course, before I ask this question, I'll say up the Matildas and good luck tonight, but can the Minister explain the impact on the community of hosting events like the Women's World Cup?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Green for the supplementary. The Women's World Cup is one of more than a dozen major events in Australia in the lead-up to Brisbane 2032. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to promote gender equality through sport, and this government is committed to that pursuit. You only have to look around the stands at the young boys and girls in Matilda's hats and jerseys holding up signs with words of support for their heroes to see the impact that the Women's World Cup is having right across the board, because sport is so important for the community beyond the result. When the Matildas head out on the field tonight in Sydney, they'll be cheered on by another roaring crowd, this time over 75,000 people, a demonstration that their community is behind them, regardless of the outcome. We are so proud of everything they have achieved to date and the way they have conducted themselves. That's a message that will resonate beyond tonight's game or this tournament, that Australia is ready to show up for women in sport. And can I say we wish them all the best tonight. I know that everyone in this place will be cheering them on.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Henderson.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Senator Watt. Minister, a photograph obtained by Sky News shows an ABC Four Corners crew on the driveway of Woodside CEO Meg O'Neill's home in Perth last week. Do you agree the photograph calls into doubt the ABC's public explanation of what occurred at the property last week?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Henderson. I was actually asked about this matter on Sky News myself yesterday morning, and the point I made there was that everyone, no matter whether they're a CEO of a large Australian company or a senator or any member of the public, is entitled to feel safe in their own home. And as I think one of our ministers, and certainly Minister Rowland, commented last week, it's simply unacceptable for anyone to present a risk to a human being in their own home, as would appear to have occurred in Perth last week. Now, the ABC Managing Director has made statements that he is investigating this matter. I think it would be a good idea for us to reserve judgment until we see the results of that investigation, but I have seen the photos that Senator Henderson refers to, and as I said yesterday, I think they're very worrying. I know that Minister Rowland has already sought information from the ABC about what has occurred here. Of course, the ABC does have editorial independence, and that does need to be respected. But I think all of us would be concerned if we learned that a film crew from any media outlet was involved in any way in an activity that is intimidating and goes way beyond what should be acceptable in public debate. So I suggest that we should, as I say, wait to reserve judgment until that investigation is complete. As I said yesterday, I think that the image that has surfaced is very worrying. Minister Rowland, I know, is taking this matter seriously and has sought information from the ABC as is appropriate, and we are very interested in hearing the outcome of that investigation.
Thank you, Minister. Just a moment, Senator Henderson, before I call you. Senator Hanson-Young, I'm not quite sure what precipitated that interjection, but I'd remind you that I've asked for silence and there are other opportunities throughout the sitting week to make a contribution. Senator Henderson, first supplementary.
Minister, last week Senator Wong told this chamber that the minister had sought further details from the ABC on this matter, and you referred to this in your answer. However, could you please clarify, has the minister had a response as yet? And if not, is that acceptable to the minister?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Watt.
Well, I'm aware, Senator Henderson, that the ABC has confirmed that a television crew was present to film the activities of this activist group for an upcoming report, but the ABC has said that they had no prior knowledge of the nature of behaviour that would occur. But the minister, I know, takes this matter very seriously, and that's why she has sought further information from the ABC on this matter.
Minister Watt. Senator Henderson.
Much, President. On a point of order of direct relevance, I was seeking information about whether the minister had sought further details, not the public statement, but further details from the ABC. Has there been a response? And if there hasn't been a response, is that acceptable?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. I do think the minister is being relevant, and I'll continue to listen carefully to his answer.
Thank you, President. Well, I've already said, Senator Henderson, a couple of times now that the minister has sought information from the ABC. I understand she has also spoken with the ABC chair, who provided reassurance that the ABC TV crew had no prior knowledge of the nature of the behaviour that would occur. But clearly, with the image that has surfaced yesterday morning, there are some further questions, I think, to be answered by ABC management. That's why the minister's office has sought further information. I think we need to recognise that this image only came to light yesterday and it's being handled seriously.
For answering has expired. Senator Henderson, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Will the government join the coalition and support the establishment of a Senate inquiry into the ABC's involvement in the matter?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Watt.
Well, that's the first I've heard of a proposal from the opposition to establish such a Senate inquiry. I'm not sure whether that's been canvassed with anyone else within government ranks. Ordinarily, what one would do when proposing a Senate inquiry is come and have a chat to people rather than use a question in question time to announce that intention. But yeah, I mean, we know that's not the purpose of the question. I've already said a couple of times now that this matter is being investigated by ABC management. I think the appropriate thing to do, given their editorial independence, something that former coalition governments haven't well understood, that independence, I knew that would get a rise.
Please resume your seat, Senator Henderson.
Thank you. On direct relevance, President. The question is,
Senator Henderson,
will the government...
Senator Henderson, there is no need to repeat the question. I'm well aware of what the question is, and the minister is being directly relevant.
Well, it's about the Senate inquiry, President.
Senator Henderson, please resume your seat. Minister Watt.
Can I suggest to Senator Henderson and all members of the opposition that I think the appropriate way to handle this is to see what the outcome of the ABC investigation is, rather than leap to judgment, set up a Senate inquiry, get the culture war running again, which is what would apparently seem to be behind the Senator's question.
Senator Wong.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice, and I also indicate